and the rabbis are there, kind of like dealing with the Jewish tourists, or people who are like, people from their communities, right? That are tourists and these types of things like Chabad, these different things, and which is great, But there's a lot of people today that um, see themselves as descendants of Israel, and I guess one of the things I wanted to just read, I saw a verse in Isaiah, and it was like, well, we already learned this verse, but it's just like the verse. Well, we're going to be on it anyways, I guess. All right, sorry about that. Hold on a second. Everything's so far this year, like this like New Year, everything's just been kind of like a little bit like, I don't want to say goofy, but it just like it's just like a new, like everything's like clumsy, you know what I mean? Hold on one second. Anyways, so let me do what I want to do. Oh man. All right. So anyways, so the point is like this. So what I want to do is that just like before we go further, because I want to just bring up a point. All right. So we saw the verse a little bit in this thing that we're reading. It's basically it's a book, it's a verse on Isaiah, and the thing is, like one of the things I was thinking about, I was actually talking about it with L'chaim OG, was this idea of saying like like from a musical perspective. I was asking him to see what his thoughts were, like other like you think about the impact of like Michael Jackson, right? And like just like how big, I mean, like people are fainting, you know what I'm saying? And it's just like, what was it about Michael? Was it the media? Like, what was it, that really created that thing? And so I said to what came to me over Shabbos was this idea that Michael Jackson, and that's why I was asking him because he's like a music guy. Michael Jackson is the only like artist, like really artists in general, but I just want to say black artists because like from American perspective, that's like kind of like the innovators of like the sound of America, right? But the point is just saying that how many black artists have came and took responsibility in their art for all of humanity? I'm not saying like people who I'm not saying there weren't black people who advocated for different causes, this Africa, these types of things, but this dynamic of saying like his mindset was is that he saw himself as a channel for like all of humanity. And I'm sure a lot of that had to do with growing up as a kid and touring around the world and meeting so many people, right? And so I was thinking like, that's the idea, right? Like Michael Jackson took in his on his level, right? I'm not saying he had the technology we have and there's allegations against him, anything, all these things I hear. All I'm saying is about impact, right? And I remember one time I was, in it was in LA. I was walking and it was like some like kind of country western place. It was like a bar type of thing, and I was walking by it, but they were playing Michael Jackson, and all the people that were doing the steps together. It was like, oh, like really, really white people in cowboy boots, And and I was just like, wow, just I just remember that. But the point is saying that how much of a program is it mentally? And I think we talked about this before, but how much of a program is it mentally to how much of a program is it mentally to think and say like, hey, you know what? I'm black, and so therefore, my avoda is to help black people, right? And somebody can say, well, you know what? You have to help your own people. You have to help yourself before you can help other people, right? And I hear that. I hear that. But I'm talking about from the standpoint of spiritually, right? I'm talking about in terms of the concept of like energy distribution, right? And so, like, it's an interesting, and I don't have a source on this, but I just remember hearing this story from this rabbi named his name was Eliyahu Yardini, right? He has a brother. Anyways, so he was telling the story about Abraham, right? He was saying, where did this concept of shakrit come from? I haven't seen it inside. Maybe it says in the Zohar, maybe the Arizal says, I don't know. But either way, it's a story that I heard, and I don't really have a source to it, so I'm putting a precursor there. But he was saying that Abraham, used to like wait in front of his tent all the time. He used to wait. He used to always be looking for guests and this whole thing. He was always just looking for opportunities to share. He was in a frame of Hesed. And so one day, he was sitting and he became somewhat sad that, there's so many people in the world and he's never going to be able to share it with them. He's not going to be able to ever meet most, them, the whole thing, and he just think like, wow. And so an angel came to him or something like this and, basically showed him, like raised him like to this like high level. He was able to see everything, and he taught him about prayer. He taught him about tefillah. He taught him about this ability to talk to God on behalf of all these different people, right? Which is like the precursor of Sodom and that whole thing. So the thing is saying that the concept of whether it was prayer, and like I said, I don't know if this is an exact story, but the point is that the concept with prayer, the concept with the mitzvah, the concept of everything that we're doing, right, is has to be in the avoda of the whole entire world, all of God's creation, right? Like we have to have that in mind. Like every mitzvah that we do is like this is for the light of creation. Like if I'm teaching say an African American person or someone who's from my community, okay, I'm teaching that person, but I'm teaching a neshama. You know what I'm saying? I'm teaching a soul, right? And if I'm teaching a soul, then there's billions of these souls. If I'm in the frame of Western society, right? If I'm in the frame of this world, then okay, there's black people, there's white people, there's Asian people, there's all these different peoples. But no, I'm not, I don't prescribe to that method of thinking, right? That method of thinking does not dictate my reality. This is the same method of thinking that denies the soul. That says the soul doesn't exist. It's metaphysical. And so therefore we're only going to deal with the external person. And we're going to decide who the person is in their external appearance and their external structures and what they're able to produce, what they're able to acquire. But the correction of the soul or the essence of the soul or the essence of the purpose of life, we're not even going to address it. Right. And so that's the challenge, right? Is to move ourselves out of that thinking of the construct of that the soul doesn't exist, right? The soul doesn't exist, so therefore I'm going to focus on the external thing. This is the same prison that doesn't allow us to realize that there's nothing that we cannot accomplish in life. There's nothing that we cannot manifest in life. Because if I believe in the human system, which says that I'm a race and I'm an ethnic group and have an ethnic history and I'm an education, I'm an income, I'm a nationality, all of these things, there's somebody else that dictate what these things represent to me. And they can change because they're in control of it. But if I hold by God's system, which is the fact that God blew a soul into me, and then I'm in this world to take my nature, shifting my nature from the desire to receive to desire to share, thus correcting my soul, thus achieving the purpose of my soul coming here, thus achieving the purpose of creation, to go back up into the heavens, to return back during the time of Michaye Hamitim. And then as that happens, my soul will be put into this old body and it will transform itself And then this old body will become a vessel of sharing. And so the sharing of the body and the soul will be completely connected to the Creator. This is the purpose of reality. This is it right there, nutshell, done. So when we acknowledge Hashem, this is the basis of creation. This what separates us from the animal. The animal does not have the ability to contemplate and empathize with things outside of themselves that are not directly related to them. Like a group of deers in Alaska cannot empathize with chimpanzees in Africa. I was gonna say Nigeria, but ain't no monkeys in Nigeria. I mean, maybe there is. I don't know. Anyways, but the point is just saying like this is saying that the point is just saying like that concept. So as a human being, right? As a human being, right? Knowing the different levels, right? The rock, vegetation, animal, human. The highest point of the human being is his ability to empathize with others. So what does that mean? That means my ability to empathize with other things is an expression of what level I'm living as a human being. So if I'm in the place of saying that, okay, you know what? You know what? I care about every blade of grass. I care about every insect. I care about every aspect of the vegetation kingdom. I care about every rock. I care about every animal. And for sure, I care about every human being. And I want to use my power to direct God's Kedusha into the kalims of the rock kingdom, the vegetation kingdom, the animal kingdom. I'm going to project myself in that way, in the human kingdom. I'm going to take accountability for the light distribution that the rest of creation have. And I don't even leave, I may be in the minion, I may be praying by myself. But that is where my mind is at. All the souls that are trapped in this world, yes, we're taking it there. Kav Hayashar, we know about it. All the souls that are wandering the world that have not were able to access the heavens, I'm also going to take them into an account. All of my ancestors in the heavens that are looking to get an aliyah to go higher, right? I have them in the mind. And so when I'm walking the world, I am a distribution of light for the kalim, for the vessels in this world and the world above. This is where I'm holding at. This is where I'm holding at. So this whole concept, right? This whole concept of, black people, black leadership, all this type of stuff. I mean, it's cool and I get it. And there was a time where, my ancestors, they were killing people. You know what I mean? And so that whole black thing, it meant something very different during that time, right? So the point is the same. So how do I raise to that consciousness of Abraham Avinu? Because I don't want to raise to the consciousness of Martin Luther King. I'm okay. I'm good. I appreciate it. He did good. He fought. He did. He went against slavery. I get it. Malcolm X, I get it. Marcus Garvey, I get it. And people think, oh, well, he's not proud of his culture. He's not proud of who he is. He's not proud of who he is because he's challenging. Because I'm challenging what is wisdom. I'm sorry, university, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I know your prestige and your big buildings and you got these signs and the whole thing. I get it. But I don't believe you. You told me I was 3/5 of a human being. And then you switched up on it. You told me I shouldn't even be in the same room as someone with a different skin tone as me. Academia taught that. Your church taught that. These things are, so I don't believe you. So if you come to me and tell me, hey, Martin Luther King was the greatest man, I'm sorry, I have to have critical thinking. I'm a Jew. I'm sorry, I have to have critical thinking and say, how great was he actually? How great was he actually? I want to know about Avraham Avinu. I want to know about Yitzhak Avinu. I want to know about Yaakov Avinu because you know what? Just like I'm related to Martin Luther King, I'm also related to these guys too. This is also my genetic memory. This is also, I have the same neshama, I have the same soul as Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov have the same neshama from the place of Kedusha, where the holy souls come from. That's where my soul is from. That's why I'm learning Torah right now. So the point is just to say that this whole concept, this idea that this world that we live in puts us in terms of our self-evaluation. And if you challenge it, you're a self-hating black person. Bro, but stop trying to make me worship your blackness, though. You also told me that. You also told me, oh, but there's black history. You're not proud of your history. But you told me that, though. You didn't tell me about the Igbos. You didn't tell me about the tribes in Africa. Come on. You never told me about their claims. So the point is just saying, like, so this whole method of thinking and understanding the world that we're in, and the same thing goes for people who call themselves white and everything else, Ashkenaz, Sephardic. What's this got to do with anything? At least as a black person, I can admit it very easily because the terms they gave me were used to degrade. You think the terms empower you, and that's your challenge. Anyways, so I want to read a little bit of this, a few verses from the book of Isaiah. It's part of actually what we were learning earlier, but I just want to refresh our memory, and it's something that I think we should really, really ingrain into ourselves as just a thought, right? Because we got to get to this place where we start imagining world peace and how to create it, not just like talk about it. How can we bring these ideas into reality? What types of things do we need to do with the institutions? Okay, so this is Isaiah, right? It says, Hadaver Asher Chaza, Yishayehu bin Amos. Okay, so it says, Al Yehuda veYishalayim. Okay, so he says these are the words that Isaiah, son of Amos, prophesies concerning Judah and Yushalayim. Okay, so this is where we're at. This is the prophet, and and the thing is, just as a meditation with the prophets, I know people like yourself, other people, are very connected to Tanakh. I'm connected to Tanakh. Everyone's connected to Tanakh. But we have to have that aspect of like connecting to that aspect of prophecy when we learn it. Not that we need to be prophets, but that aspect of the thought of or the idea of letting God channel through us, right? So he says like this. He says Vehaya barita haya. I'm sorry. Hayamim nakon haye har bet Hashem. So he says. So he's saying like this. So here's the prophecy. This is what he says. And it will come, it says, in the days to come, right? The end of days. The mount of God's house shall stand firm above the mountains, the towers above the hills, and all the nations shall glaze upon it with joy. All right, so let's just go through this really quickly. He says, at the end of the days, on the mount of God's house, right? We know what that is. It's the Har Bayit, right? He says, shall stand firm above the mountains, the Har Nisi, and the tower above the hills. And all the nations, okay, so all the nations will glaze on it with joy. Ve'chalu amim rabim ve'amru lakum. Laku na'ale. So he says like this. This is what the people are going to say, right? He says, and many people shall go and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of God, to the house of God of Jacob, that it may be instructed in God's way, that we may be instructed in God's ways. He said he says that we may walk in, he says that we may be instructed in God's ways. That's the halakha. That we should walk in God's path. That's the derek. He says, for instruction shall come forth from Zion. the word of God, the word of God of Jerusalem. So Isaiah is describing this time where people are going to come all over the world, right? And the nations of the world are going to come and they're going to look upon the Harabayat, and it's going to give them a warm joy in their heart. And they're going to see God's presence, and they're going to see God's presence, and they're going to want to become closer. So let us go. Let us connect to this light force of the Creator. He says, "Ve'ishafet bina hagoyim hahokicha hachokad le'amim baradim." So he says, and thus God will judge among the nations and obliterate, and he says, and obliterate for many people, and he shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into prung hooks. And the nation shall not take up a sword against the nation, and they shall never know war again. This is what we're talking about. This is the level. This is what we're at. Not this segregation. I'm worried about. Oh, my people. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. No, come on. No, we are here responsible for the world. Why is it? Why is it that the art, the political, the fashion, the education, the things that come out of my community affect the whole world, but they tell me to only focus on my people? Sounds like a little bit of manipulation to me. He says, "Bed Yaakov laku nalka beor Hashem." And he says, "Oh, the house of Jacob, let us come and walk by the light of God." All right, I don't want to go so much into that. It's not the point of the share today, but the point is just saying that that's the idea. Any thoughts on that? What we just read before we go to the next part?
Uh, I mean, it's interesting that, all the peoples will come. Like that frequency shift, that's one thing that like when I look out into the world, is how it's gonna come about. It makes me really understand the power of Mashiach. Because when you look out into the world, Rob, it's like, man, how is this all gonna come together? Like how are people's, you know, mindset gonna change? Like how are people going to see past the social constructs? How are people going to see past greed? How are people going to overcome the Yesahara? It's like, man, how is this going to be possible? And I think that in itself is a Yesahara trying to like deter you from even trying. Because our job is to try. Our job is to, create the vessels so Hashem can fill it with light. But, I don't know. To be honest, like it doesn't
Well,
deter me, but it's like I don't know how it's all gonna come together because it's just like even like in the African American community, it's like we have so much trauma, we have so much distrust. Like anything that's, I mean, and rightfully so, but it's like, how do we overcome that? I'm not really sure, to be honest with you.
yeah, and I think that's the key. There's two keys in that point. One key is that we don't have to figure out how it's going to come together. God has already said it's going to. The future reality is already created. We're in this in between like fishbowl stage, right? Where we have to go through this cocooning in this fishbowl, but the outside world around that I'm not able to participate in yet, that's already there, right? And so that world is already created. Our job is only to deal with cocooning. God figures that out. That's one point. Second point is we don't know how tomorrow is going to come together. We have confidence that it will because of today, but we don't know. If that was the case, no one would have went to work on 9/11. Everyone would just stayed home, right? Because tomorrow there's going to be this thing. People on October 7th here in Jerusalem. I mean, in Israel. God forbid, in Israel, right? So I'm sure they wouldn't have went to that festival. So the point is just saying that we don't know the dynamic of tomorrow, but we have trust in tomorrow. And we have trust in tomorrow because of today. And today, we believe, is given to us by Hashem, right? Because some people never know that. Some people are just like, hey, So, anyways, big picture, the point is just to say that, when we think about everything that's going on, we have to just be in mind, like, it's not, where could we, how are we going to figure this out? It's not even our job. That's trying to understand the essence. We can't. All we can deal with is form and form of substance. And that's if you get past your objective perception of what's going on. The objective form, the thing you project on it. Maybe you could get to the aspect of understanding the form of substance and the substance itself. If you get past ourselves, right? And even if we get that far, we still will never connect to the essence, right? So we don't know how it's going to manifest. And that's the beauty of life. That allows us to serve God. That's allows us to walk the days with somewhat, vulnerability. Because if we know Mashiach is going to come, it doesn't matter, bro. Nothing matters. The only thing that matters is just keeping the Torah. Because eventually you're not going to be here, God forbid, and I'm not going to be here. No one, and all the people we know are not. Life goes on. Those souls are going to continue on. That's the reality. So whatever we say, oh, I want to have this, I want to have 10 kids. Bro, I need to have kids, right? All these things, right? But I don't know what the cocoon is in this lifetime. I can't tell you. But all I know is that I can serve Hashem with perfection in every moment of my life. That's all I know. This happens tomorrow. That happens tomorrow. This do this. I do this. I do. What are you going to do? Right. So that's the challenge. Right. That's the challenge, is being able to have that understanding. Like, bro, this thing is temporary, dog. Like, I mean, what are you going to do? You know. I saw an interview with with Kanye yesterday. That was the academics, right? And it's just like, bro, I see Kanye and it's like, I feel like sometimes I was making a joke about this when I was talking to Lakai Moji. He was like, I feel like he's like my twin. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's the opposite. You know what I mean? He's the opposite. And both of us, are both of just basic wanted freedom from that system. We saw that system. Exactly what you're talking about right now. We saw the construct. Now the difference is I noticed it much younger in life than Ye did. You know what I'm saying? Even though I still played with it. You know what I'm saying? I still play with it, but because I grew up in that suburb, I saw like, bro, this whole thing it's not real. The whole thing's not real. The whole thing is, okay, you're in the mansion, you got Mercedes this, cars this, it's not real. It doesn't lead to happiness. And really, it doesn't lead to meaning. And it gets old. Everything gets old. The girl gets old, the car gets old, everything gets old. And this is what I'm gonna spend my life to get new things because the old thing got old. Bro, that's when people lose it. That's what he went through. He got the girls, cars, this, fame, all, and he's like, dude, this is it. I went to the Grammys. All these people saw me on TV. This, I come home, empty house. That's it. Okay, I invite a bunch of people over, and I spend like 30 racks on alcohol and a bunch of money on food. And it's gonna be everybody's there, and they're chilling at my house. That's my relationships now. Now I'm the guy who just pays for everything. That's my role now. Every girl I meet, she doesn't want me. She wants that security. So will I ever experience true love? But I just wanted that. I just wanted to become a billionaire. I just want to become a billionaire. So it's just like, you got to make sense of it. But the thing is, with Kanye, I got out, you know, and I had to let go of a lot of stuff. And I was nowhere close to what he gained. I mean, I'm just a guy just running around. But the point is just saying freedom is freedom, right? And so he tried to escape with freedom, but he tried to take his riches that he got in the klipa, right? And that klipa that's connected to that old life, that old riches, it still carries on. That's why he can't get a different type of girl per se. That's why he can't do things differently. I mean, it may give him pleasure, but he wants to be a whole new person. He's changing his name. He wants to be a whole new person, right? And seeing the world from a frame of opposition is showing that he does not have a full spectrum of what reality is. Because if it's a reflection of my consciousness, because I'm just projecting on it, that means the conflict is internal. So, anyways, so we'll continue on, but it's just um, it's just a very important thing, because we could get stuck in life and these areas, but we gotta think differently. We gotta serve humanity. We gotta. Okay, so we're back into these laws, and we want to understand what's the halakhic understanding or perspective of this concept of teaching Torah to non-Jews. And understanding this, what does it mean, right? So we went through in the past. I mean, we learned the first part, and we went through different understandings of the idea, right? And basically, there's two perspectives. One perspective is an inheritance to Israel, and then there's another perspective, which is as time goes on, the other nations are going to want the Torah, and they're going to want to learn from it, and the wars and everything's going to end based off of that. Right. So the question is, how do we do that? What's the process? Where are we there now? We're not there now. How do we deal with it? And more importantly, how did different Jews deal with it throughout the ages and different communities? And that's what we're trying to get to discussion. So with this, what we're learning now is the compilations of responses, of compilations of different points, different activities to give us an overview. This isn't a pasak, right? This is an overview of the halakhic reasoning around the subject matter, right? Okay, so written law. He says written law as distinct from oral law. He said the first question we must be analyzed is whether the prohibition against the non-Jews studying Torah is limited to study of the oral law or only, or whether it includes the written law as well. The most extreme view in this regard is recorded in the Sefer Hasidim. Sorry, Hasidim. He says, I guess it's chapter 238. He said, who advises that a Jew should not even teach the Hebrew alphabet to a priest. However, the phraseology and content of the statement are indicative of a prudent advice rather than of a statutory prohibition. So he's saying that one of the most extreme views that he found, I guess, in this discourse is in Sefer Hasidim. It says, don't even teach a priest, a non-Jewish priest, whatever. I don't know why they say not priest, but the priest, don't even teach him one letter of the alphabet. And he says, but the way that it's written, he's not writing it as a pasak. He says, but he's giving it more as an advice. He says indicates of the persecution and arousal of anti-Semitism by clerics claiming proficiency in Jewish law, and lords were not at all infrequent during the medieval period. Hence, the prudence dictates that no assistance be provided to the enemies of Judaism in their attempt to destroy Jewish teachings for their own malevolent purposes. He says the Zohar, wow. He says the Zohar also categorizes forbidden, he says all those categorizing forbidden teaching non-Jews words of Torah, but the reason given is clearly mystic and rather than halakhic. Okay, so he says, okay, so this is an important point actually. So he says the strictest view, right, that he found was in reference to not wanting to teach a priest a letter. And he says, but during those times, there was a lot of anti-Semites that they were learning, it was these clergy, these Christians would be like, yeah, I understand everything about Judaism. I can read the Torah, I understand the Hebrew, and this is what it says about it. These people are wicked. We need to get rid of them, right? God forbid. And so he says, and so when they're speaking, he said he was speaking from this perspective, right? He says, in another age and under quite dissimilar circumstances, Rabbi Israel Salanter who is the creator of the Musar movement, right? All the stuff, all the Musar we read, right? And so he says he endeavored to gain acceptance of the Talmud as a recognized academic discipline. As noted earlier, he sought to have the study of the Talmud incorporated in curriculum in European universities in Gymnasium. I guess that's like grade school. His primary concern primarily was to dispel prejudice born of ignorance. One historian speculates that in addition, Israel Salanter was motivated by the desire to enhance the dignity and the prestige of the Talmud among the Enlightenment figures who, despite their own profession of Judaism, tend to denigrate all rabbinical studies. He perhaps felt that the recognition of the Talmud as a respective academic discipline might have a positive impact on non-observant Jewish. So whatever, that's one. He speculates, right? But he never stated that, right? But the point is just saying he did feel that by bringing the Talmud into academic discourse, it would remove a lot of hatred and misconceptions about Jews. He says between the polar views forbidding any instruction and permitting all instructions are a significant number of positions which view and prohibitions are operative with regards to certain forms of instructions, but not with regards to others. Chiefs among these is the view that the prohibitions serve to restrict only instructions in the law. Okay. Okay. Between these polar views, forbidding any instruction and permitting all instructions are significant numbers of positions which view the prohibitions as operative with regards to certain forms of instructions, but not with regards to others. Okay. All right, let's keep on. The chief among these is the view that the prohibition serves to restrict only instructions in the oral law, okay, which is the Gemara. He says a clear distinction between oral and written law is formulated by Rabbi Zev Hirsch Kastiet in his commentary on Sota in Hagiga, as well as the Trivonot. Okay, he says the Gemara in Sota states that a Gentile acquires knowledge of the contents of the Torah prior to the entrance of our ancestors into Eretz Israel. Okay, so the Gemara Sota says that non-Jews acquired knowledge of the content of the five books of Moses prior to the entrance of our ancestors into Eretz Israel. Okay, he says the Maharaz Hayes, without reciting a specific source, explains that the deciders have a long distinguished have long distinguished between the oral law and the written law. Restrictions with regards to the study of Torah apply to non-Jews, he declares, only applies to the oral law but not the written law. Although the Maharaz Hayes, with one exception, as noted earlier, does not identify the earlier authorities who distinguish between the oral law and the written law. This distinction may readily be inferred from the comment incorporated by Rabbeinu Gershom in his commentary on Baba Batra. The Gemara declares that although residents share a common a common courtyard cannot prevent one of the groups from accepting the Jewish pupils for the Torah's instructions. They may legitimately permit any person who shares their courtyard from providing instruction to non-Jewish students. Okay, so what's going on right now? Okay, so So he's bringing different sources that talk about the distinction between the oral and the written law. He says the Gemara declares although the residents sharing a common courtyard cannot prevent one of their own group from accepting Jewish pupils for Torah instruction, they may legitimately prevent any person who shares their courtyard from providing instruction to non-Jewish students. Since it is in general forbidden to teach to a non-Jews, the legitimate question which presents itself is what type of instructions is under consideration. Okay. Rabbeinu Gershom comments that the type of instruction under consideration he says, the Rabbeinu Gershom comments that the type of instruction under discussion is instructions in medical text or mikra. The written law, the obvious implication is that when such instructions is provided under the condition which do not cause a nuisance to others, the written law may indeed be taught to non-Jews. This is so complicated. Hold on. Okay. Okay. All right. So he says a similar distinction may be inferred from the comment of the Miri in the Sanhedrin. The Miri states that a non-Jew may study Torah if he does indeed intend to fulfill the precepts which he studies. You hear this? But is deserving of punishment if he studies solely to acquire knowledge of our Torah and our Talmud. The Miri insertion of the phrase our Talmud would indicate that it is only the study of the oral law which is objectionable. Again, his commentary on Hagiga 13a, the Mary speaks of secrets of the Torah which may not be imparted to non-Jews. So he's talking about the Kabbalah. It may be inferred that the written law, which is readily accessible to all, may be taught to a non-Jew. Among later authorities, ah, Rabbi Naphtali Zeva, he says that no one may teach the written law to a non-Jew, as do Rabbi Judah in Yeridea. He says, and the sons of the author gloss. Okay, blah, blah, blah. He says, the fact is that God commanded Yeshua to translate the Torah into 70 languages, presumably for the edification of non-Jews. He says, a similar distinction is made by numerous other authorities. He says, nevertheless, some authorities fail to make any distinction between oral and written law, and the view of the prohibition is encompassing both. This certainly seems to be the position of the Shlita of the Giborim. He says, as expressed in the previous site, commanded Shlita Giborim permits the teaching of the prophets and the was this Hapogora, whatever, to non-Jews, according to Rabbi Hoffman, the narrator. Okay, he certainly implies that other portions of the written law, which sections of the Torah dealing with the law and rituals, may not be taught to non-Jews. Rav Zev Hirsch, in his comments of Hagiga, distinction between the written law and the Torah law, indeed the Shita. So he's bringing tons of sources. And so he says, Hayes is drawing a distinction. He said, nevertheless, as Rabbi Osei correctly points out, the distinction between the oral and written law is advanced only tentatively by the Mikubalet, while it is in concluding remarks, Shita states that the references of the Torah, the reference to study Torah, the reference to study the reference to study forbidden to non-Jews are general in nature and hence primarily refer to the written law as well. All right, we get that point, right? Okay, he says among later deciders there are a number who do not distinguish between the written and oral law, which regards to the prohibition against teaching non to teaching with regards to teaching of the teaching to non-Jews. Chief among those who explicitly reject the distinction is Rabbi Yosef Shaul Nathanson in his comments appended to the letter of prohibition, which appears among the prefactor's page of Rav Yehuda. He says his argument is that no such distinction is made by Tosfos. Blah, blah. This argument, however, does not appear to be conclusive. The comments of both Tosfos and focus upon the Talmudic narrative concerning two Roman officials who are sent to the sage by their government to study Torah. The problem to which Tosfos and Yam Shelah address themselves is, in the light of the prohibition against teaching Torah to non-Jews, how is it permissible for the sage to accede to this request? Rav Yosef Shaul Nathanson draws attention to the failure of these authorities to draw a distinction between the oral and the written law in resolving this difficulty. Their failure to do so, he argues, indicates that they regard in any such distinction as invalid. However, the examination of the problem as formulated by Tosfos are Rashi's kids. I mean, it's a whole thing. It's grandkids, the whole thing. But he says they revealed in distinction, even if valid, would not dispel their difficulty. The Gemara records the sages instruct the non-Jews emissaries with the regards of the law governing liability for damages in the ox belonging to a Jew, and the master and the goring ox belonging to a non-Jew, and vice versa. The provisions of the law are cited that are clearly part of the oral versus written. All right, so we actually learned that Gemara in Yeshiva a lot. This like I think that's like probably the first Gemara they bring you in Baba Metzia, right? Was it Niziki? Niziki. Anyways, so okay. So what is going on right now? So basically what's going on is that he's just going over. First, we start off with this idea of can you teach, right? And then some people say, yeah, you could teach. Some people say you can't. Then there's discussion of what can you teach. Okay, well, some people say you could teach everything, and some people say you only can teach the written law. Some people say you can't teach the oral law. Some people say you can't teach anything, right? So he says, but so that's the point. But the point is that people say, well, why do you guys go through this? Like, why do you go through this discourse, right? Why can't it just be one way or another? Because that's not the halakha is expressing God. If the halakha is expressing, if the 613 mitzvahs are connected to 613 parts of your soul, which are connected to 613, limbs and organs in your body, right? Which is connected to the 613 parts of the physical reality that we live in. So how could it be a fixated thing? There's so many variables. There's so many variables. There's so many different situations. There's so many different parts of the world. There's so many times in history. How could you have a fixed understanding of anything as it relates to God's will, generation to generation? Right? And he says that the comment he says that this authority also refuses to make a distinction. He says the Gemara reports that Hillel agreed to the conversation of a non-Jew who wished to become a Jew. He wanted to convert in order. He says in order that he might later be appointed to high priest. He says, but only after teaching him Torah, so that the convert was aware that he could not be qualified for this office. It was evident in that instance that Hillel taught Torah to a non-Jew, despite the prohibition against doing so. The Mashal states that it is permissible for Hillel to teach Torah to a non-Jew because it was permissible to teach a Jew to teach Torah to a prospective convert. He said it's a much simpler explanation would have been that the requirement that the high priest be lineal descent of Aaron is readily obvious upon the superficial study of the Bible. It requires no knowledge of the oral law. A distinction between the oral and the written law would readily have dispelled the question raised by the Masharala. Failure to supply this answer indicates that Masharala did not recognize the validity of any distinction. Okay, so let's stop here, right? Because we just want to work in sections, right? So this will be part 3 when we do it next. Okay, so thoughts, reflections, ideas.
It's interesting. I was having a conversation earlier today, yeah, kind of similar in this vein about, it's like, what's the difference between, Judaism and like Christianity? And it kind of flows right into this point of like, why can you can teach the written law, but the oral law you have to be mindful of because like if you don't have the traditions correctly, you will misinterpret the written law in the sense it can happen. Like you look at Christianity, it's like they
Exactly.
didn't they didn't have the traditions, they didn't have the connectivity um of the of our sages. So you go completely off the derek. But you think you're on the right path. It's like, no, you're not. I was giving an example of like in Vayikra in Leviticus, okay, you slaughter an animal, but it does not tell you how. And the person I was talking to was a Christian. So I was like, go to the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, it talks about a Shabbat day's journey. It doesn't explain to you what that is, though. They're like, it doesn't. I was like, exactly. So how do you know what Shabbat's day journey is? The author, the speaker, when he was speaking to the whoever, his listeners, they obviously had an understanding of it. So it's like, when you don't have the traditions, you don't have the full totality to move, appropriately. So I'm kind of connecting that to, you can teach a written law, sure. Yehoshua translated it. But if you give that, you have to be mindful of the oral law because for one, it can be distorted because it's not with the purpose of actually fulfilling the mitzvahs. It's an intellectual exercise, which is, void of the true essence. You're just treating it like a sport in a way, like every other intellectual exercise in the world, and the Torah is much higher than that. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. It makes sense. 'Cause I think I asked you that. I think I asked you this question like last week, and I shared. So I was like, how can you teach me? This, and that. And it's like here it is, just laying it out. So yeah, it makes sense to me now.
Yeah, and yeah, that's the key thing is saying that like everything is everything that we do is halakhically, and that's why it's blessed, right?
Hmm.
And everything that we do, we want to know it. And I'm saying this because I also want to be held accountable. I also want to be that. Even more aware. I mean, these are things that I knew. I haven't read this particular discourse, but there's other things that I've learned. You know, um, when I was actually getting smicha and these things like this. But the point is just saying that like this is it's important, right? It's important to be clear. And the thing is, as you can see, the people who understand halakha, in many ways, they were able to create reality.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like for Israel Salanter, Rav Israel Salanter, blessed memory, just saying like, hey, I want to put the Talmud inside European schools. That's like intense. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
even if you want to say like the historian that maybe he did it because he wanted to convince the Jews that the Talmud was prestigious or something, even at that still required you to still teach thousands of non-Jews, tens of thousands. Anyways, let's play it by ear if you're around this evening. I want to finish this up if possible. Any last points, thoughts?
Yeah, it makes me think about I cannot remember his name at all. But you were saying how, you can create reality. It was a rabbi back in I can't remember the time, but maybe like the late 1800s. but the Jewish community was no longer speaking Hebrew. So, he made it a point to teach his son to just speak nothing but Hebrew. And from that small point, it spread throughout, the Jewish world. And now it was a renaissance of Hebrew speaking, Jews again. And I was like, that's so amazing. One person, with this thought, revitalized the entire community to speak the language once again. So like you're saying, create reality. Like he literally created reality. And Hashem aided him in that because I was like, wow, that's just amazing. So I just thought about that when you said it. Can't remember his name though. I can't remember who he was. Rabbi, I think it was something Judah. I have to look it up, look into it.
Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. I don't know, it just came to me when you said that, but I just remember reading about the Arizal, and they would say like, I mean, you may know this already, but they would say like on Shabbat when he would only speak in Lashon Kodesh to his wife. He wouldn't speak in any language. He only speak in the biblical language, the biblical Torah, the biblical Hebrew was the only way he would speak to his wife on Shabbat. He wouldn't use any other language. Outside of that, like, he would speak Arabic or whatever language they had around there. Oh, that's what random thought. I don't know what it meant. Anyways, all right. So we'll figure it out. Baruch atah Adonai, le'olam, amen ve'amen.